Hello, all. Astrologer Alan Anand has joined me from Canada to talk about his not so new book, uh, Kama Yoga, which talks about love, marriage, and sexuality from a Jyotish perspective. And thanks, Alan, for participating. And it's really a pleasure to kind of see another book from your side coming out, which is a very, very significant contribution in the world of Jyotish.
Thanks, Ashwin. Yeah, it's a work of love. What can I say? My previous books, Parivartana Yoga and Kala Sarpa, I put in, more time than I ever expected in doing so. And I think part of the issue with me is once I get my teeth into it, I like to do a really thorough job. I like to have a multitude of horoscope examples, and somehow I get pulled down the rabbit hole of research in some form or another, even though it's not asked for. And sometimes that stuff ends up in the appendices. But it all is a part of forming, a very rich experience for me, because as they say about teachers, when you teach, you learn twice, because you have to prep yourself to deliver something coherent to your students. And I think the same is true of books. And this is certainly the case for me. I end up going far deeper and developing far more material than I ever anticipated.
Amazing. So first thing that I want to kind of get out is let me just show the book on screen so that people are aware of what they're looking at. The reason why I see this as a very significant contribution is it's not just because it is another book on Jyotish, but it is from an astrologer who understands the cultural perspective of India and why some things are conventional and why some things are not conventional. So I don't know many astrologers who practice Jyotish from the Western world actually understanding the intricacies of the cultural underpinnings that actually form Jyotish in a way. And on the other, like one more thing is, I also kind of, many people would have already read the book and purchased the book, but the reason why you are hearing it from me so late, which was due at least before 6 months, is because of my own fault. But I think, talking about this book is always good at any time. So thanks, Alan, once again for your great contribution. And I am a fan of your work when it comes to Parivartana Yoga and Viparita Raja Yoga, and also Kala Sarpa. Not many people have explored it as much as you have done in detail. And Kama Yoga. So we have a book from Robert Swoboda, which kind of gets into relationships. But I thought that this book kind of ends up complementing Robert's book on relationships by giving a significant dimensions to just understand the chart, not from a synastry perspective, but even from a very, very individualistic perspective. So maybe let's talk about what kind of prompted you to do this book in the first place.
Sorry, first I just want to clarify something too. You refer to Robert Svoboda's book, but I think you're referring to Hart Defoe and Robert Svoboda's jointly authored book, Light on Relationships,
exactly.
Which is largely an analysis of synastry or compatibility. Yes. You had me worried there for a minute because, I tried to, do my literature review before writing this book just to know what was out there beforehand. I thought I'd missed something. Okay, I feel better now. So what prompted me? Well, here's one thing, Ashwin, and any astrologer with any number of years experience very quickly learns that out of 10 clients that might come to see you, in a given period, 8 of them will be interested in relationships, and 5 of them will be interested in career, and the other, 1 or 2 may be interested in something other, creativity, spiritual pursuits, health issues, finance, family dynamics, etc., etc. But the common theme is certainly relationships, again and again and again. And so I've always made a point with my students is, Learn how to, analyze a horoscope in order to determine the prospects for relationship for the individual and also their prospects for career, because inevitably those are the two key topics that will emerge again and again and again. So this book was, part of my own self-development exercise, and I think all of my books have been in this vein.
Right.
It's not that I'm writing it necessarily for an audience. Well, I know it exists, but I'm writing these as much for myself to thoroughly learn inside out everything that
Yeah.
needs to be known and said about these particular topics.
I think you touched the most important part, where as a writer we also end up learning so many things. So in most cases we start writing something, and then it kind of emerges into something big, and then we realize that okay, maybe this is a book. That's how it happened for me, but I'm sure some of those experiences would be true for you as well. And talking about just getting into the book itself now, the very like initially in the book you get into the cultural norms and standards, and you kind of differentiate very beautifully and also sequentially by talking about marriage, divorce, sex and fidelity, and also some you bring in the academic uh, stuff related to relationships and sexuality and all those things. So without just getting into the astrological aspects of what does the seventh house mean and what does the fifth house mean and what does the eighth house mean, I think the reason why the book is solid enough is because of the background that you provide, and also trying to understand what a human needs from a relationship is very important. So talking about cultural norms, so uh, what is the cultural norm from your perspective that is relevant to astrology and relationships and sexuality, uh, that kind of forms a major uh, foundation of the book in many ways?
Well, for centuries, we all pretty much abided by a certain sort of cultural or moral standard. And whether that was in India or Victorian England or 18th century France or even America in the early days, there was a certain abiding by principles laid down in spiritual or religious works, whether it's the Bible or other codes of conduct. But, since the sexual revolution of the 60s, starting in the Western world, and then it became a bit of a tsunami that is, rippled across the world. And it takes time, of course, to get to other cultures, but inevitably, it has done so in India, and, will creep into the Middle East and other parts of the world as well, too. So this is not to say whether it's right or wrong or an
Yeah.
inevitability. It is simply a fact. So that we're much more, comfortable talking about sexual matters than we ever were before. So it's part of a sort of an era of openness or transparency that enables us to look at such subjects with a certain degree of academic objectivity. Let's say looking at the horoscope in that regard, is just one such example. I had the experience last year, I guess, when I was speaking at the Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, which is an ashram originally established by Swami Dayananda in Pennsylvania. And they'd invited me to, provide some books for their bookstore. And they were happy to take Parivartana Yoga, and they were happy to take Kalasarpa, but they were reluctant to take Kama Yoga, basically on the principle that, it delved into, sexuality, which, in some circles is still a bit of a closed off subject, but that's in a very limited environment. In due course, actually, after someone read the book and understand that it's not just something gratuitous or frivolous, but it's really just an extension of horoscopy or Jyotish in analyzing the wide span of human behavior, and sexuality is part and parcel of who we are. Thanks to the primal urge, you and I exist, and are here today to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Hart Defoe's guru, he was very fond of sort of little one-liners that were sort of very pivotal. And one day in satsang, where somebody was, sort of moaning and groaning about the sorry state of their life, at this point in time, and he said, the reason why you are miserable today is because some 30 years ago or whatever, your mother and father wanted to have some pleasure.
All right. Which kind of nicely takes us into the next important topic, which is karma and relationships. So the choice that we make today ends up biting us somewhere, or maybe does not necessarily bite, but still we are always bound to the results of the choices that we made in our past. So
Yes.
The philosophical orientation and the text that you kind of make it central in the third chapter, I think primarily deals with karma and relationships. So in India, it's very common to it's a belief. It's not even an understanding for many people. It's a belief that we kind of get together with a person which is already destined. So it's like it's a fixed thing. It is fatalistic, no matter what. And some people may agree with the idea that it is fated, and some people would not. So in general, how do you see karma and sexuality and relationships, and why you think it is one of the most important things in understanding the chart from a relationship and also from a sexual perspective? Because I think that forms another pillar of your book with which you kind of travel towards the further chapters, and before jumping into the very, very rich example charts.
Yeah, well, karma and astrology. I'm always amused when I'm, online and looking at one or another, Facebook astrology groups, when I see some Western astrologer promoting something called karmic astrology. And I think to myself, well, all astrology is karma, and you don't own some aspect of it by calling it karmic astrology. But, the mystery of relationships, yeah, I mean, but, that can be dissected, to some degree quite successfully through the horoscope. But you have to understand, the difference between what is called drid or adrid karma, fixed or unfixed karma. When you have multiple pieces of evidence saying that this sort of situation or behavior and consequences will prevail. And you have multiple instances of that, happening in the horoscope. And, the typical sort of bhava vichara, takes place. You look at what planets occupy and aspect the seventh house, let's say. You look at the status of the seventh lord. What are its avastas? What house has it gone to? Is it stabilized by benefics or destabilized by malefics? And last but not least, the karaka for relationships, Venus. What is its status by avasta, house placement, and stabilization? And if you have, a stacked evidence, again and again and again of, let's call it negativity in that regard, then you are witnessing a sort of fixed karma scenario for problematic relationships. Contrast that with someone else whose, seventh house is occupied and aspected only by benefics. The Lord is strong and well placed. Venus is strong and well placed. I mean, that's all very positive, and that's a fixed karma for benefits in relationships. Somebody who, marries their true love first time out and has no eye for anybody else the rest of their life and lives with that person person forever. And then you have the mixed variety where, it's a mixed bag. You have, malefics in the seventh house, but you have benefics aspecting it. The Lord is strong, but it's in a bad place. Venus is weak, but it's in a good place. This is what we call a mixed karma, and such a person will have mixed experience of relationship. And each of those sort of typically, not in lockstep, but, paralleling the dasha bhukti analysis, because that's what unpacks the karma in the horoscope is the dasha sequence. I mean, the whole philosophy of Jyotish it could just give you shivers because it's so profound.
Brilliant, because there are just innumerable factors that we have in our classical texts just to analyze the relationships and the nature of relationships of an individual. So as you pointed out, we have benefic influences in the seventh house, or the seventh lord is quite favorably placed, and on the other hand we have malefic influences with benefic configurations, and may or may not have afflictions for the seventh lord. So this kind of indicates mixed experiences with relationships. Maybe we can also associate this with evolving karma, that is, people learn as they kind of live their life from a relationship perspective. Would you kind of agree with that? Like, obviously, in with respect to the dashas and bhuktis or antras.
Well, just as you're speaking, and I'm reflecting upon my previous response, it's very important to understand the distinction between behavior or actions and outcome. So, some people are born romantics. They pursue relationships zealously. It's what they want. It's what they need. They never rest, but, in the pursuit of relationship. And yet there is no guarantee that that person will enjoy the happiness that they dream about. Meanwhile, there are other people who do not pursue relationships and actually might come out of, their parents' house or high school and go off to university with a thought only of career and not interested in relationship whatsoever. In fact, even holding the prospect of relationship at an arm's length, thinking that it will interfere with their career. And lo and behold, they sometimes get married, even though they didn't intend to. So there's intention, behavior, and actions, which are not always, congruent with the outcome. So the outcome is karma, but I talk about the behaviors and the intentions and the actions, which are vasanas, which are the impulses that we feel within ourselves in order to do something. But I might feel a great impulse to, play guitar and perform in public, but I could do that my whole lifetime and never enjoy the recognition that I think I deserve.
Yeah.
One is intention, my vasana to perform, but the other is karma, which is God's decision to toss me a cookie after my performance, right? And give me the reward that I think that I deserve. Those two are very different things. And I'm reminded of, any number of clients in the past who would sit down in front of me, and, typically a young woman, for instance, and she would say something like this: "Tell me when I'm going to get married and how many children I will have." Now, you recognize right away that is a huge assumption, right? It's a huge assumption to know that you will get married, to believe that you will get married, and to believe that you will have children. And neither of those are a given. I've had, the experience of clients going away angry at me because I did not tell them what they wanted to hear. And only years later will they get back in touch with me and say, I was angry with you that day, but now I realize you were simply speaking the truth and I didn't want to accept it at the time. Now I've come to terms with it and I'm okay with that. And in fact, it's a relief now to know that I don't have to worry about that. So, I mean, life is mysterious in that respect. A horoscope, is one of the keys to unlocking that.
I think the idea of kind of acting upon and having something in mind, and then going on and acting on it are entirely two different things. And you spoke as if you actually looked at my chart before the talk, but you never did. So And again, uh, just circling back to what you said to kind of touch upon at a more uh, intricate level. So we can obviously decode whether the person is romantically inclined or sexually inclined from the chart, but we can also decode whether they will act upon it or not, because having inclinations towards romance is one thing, but something might stop them uh, in acting upon. So obviously, we can decode this by looking at a chart. So how do you think that we should approach something like that? So because it's very important to understand that these are two separate things. Many astrologers kind of sometimes uh, just see relationship as one particular phenomenon. Obviously, it's not wrong, but I think it is always useful to have multiple perspectives to kind of differentiate two or three dimensions within relationships.
Yeah, so not really giving away too much from what's in the book, but
Yeah.
romantics are driven by Moon and Venus in the
Mhm.
horoscope, having some sort of dominant influence on the ascendant or the seventh house, primarily, as you would expect, right? Because we're
Yes.
talking about relationships. And on the flip side of it, we have Mercury and Saturn, the two sort of, neuter planets, one being, very too analytical and fickle and adolescent to participate in relationships, and the other one being too cold, distant, and old to, participate in relationships. If Mercury and Saturn are dominant influences on the ascendant or the seventh house or both, then you've got a person who's disinclined for marriage. I mean, this is a very rough
General.
triage of sort. We're trying to get a grip on the client at the outset as to what their inclination might be. And then with Dasha and Bhukti, and of course the influence of other grahas in the horoscope, we get more of a sense, will this be a fleeting circumstance, or is this a lifelong sort of characteristic that they will abide by? And so you get people, who are serial romantics or serial monogamists. I mean, they fall quickly in love with somebody and they're head over their heels, and for a couple of years, and then suddenly, it's not fun or exciting anymore, and they're moving on to something else. And I cover that whole phenomena in the book as well too, about divorce and multiple relationships, and people who just can't stop searching, a bit like a shark, which cannot rest, is always in search of the next feeding. That's kind of crude, but you understand what I mean. Some people are
Yeah.
compelled in that way.
Right now, I just want to kind of touch upon this domestic and foreign affairs when it comes to relationships. I don't know how much you want to talk, but I think it will be interesting to kind of touch upon this particular thing with uh, you know having this cultural outset in our mind, because in India it's a very big thing.
Yep.
Not necessarily the casteism. I know it's still prevailing in some places, but if you go back to Manusmriti and see, there is nothing that is related to uh, something that a person is born with respect to caste. It's always what they do as part of their 10th house stuff profession.
Mm-hmm.
But because of various corruptions and invasions, we see a very very different uh, perspective or ideology that's being followed, or the way people understand caste is very different today, and largely it comes down to the way we live life, but not necessarily uh, you know what we do in life. And on the other hand, it's become by birth. So how do we kind of see, like, because it's still unconventional for an Indian to actually get married to a foreigner, or yeah, something like that. Let's not get into the religious aspects, but still, it's
Sure.
still very, very unconventional for an Indian to get married to a foreigner, even in some of the most open-minded families. And I don't mean to say that the other end is narrow-minded, but still, they need to have some kind of a far-fetched ideology when they are actually receptive towards foreign affairs.
A far-fetched ideology, or a pattern within the horoscope that gives them the vasana to willingly follow that route.
Correct.
I've forgotten her name now. Nick Jonas and
Priyanka Chopra.
Chopra. Yes, thank you. So there's an example, and I think I offer that example in the book for someone who has, this sort of a bias. And keep in mind that a bias is not a directive or a compulsion.
Right.
It's an inclination for something or other. So, a person can have a bias for this, that, or the other thing, but, parental or societal expectations or demands or, outright control can, quell your bias and defeat your desire in some instances. But, in others, given a certain liberality, which is, slowly happening within society in a way, in my society and in your society too, our morals and our social behaviors are constantly in flux and evolving, and so dependent upon the the surrounding ethos of family and society, we become more and more free, let's say, to act upon our own vasanas and pursue those things that we desire. You talked about the domestic versus foreign affairs, which was just a colorful phrase that I used to indicate those who are, feel, I'll use the word compelled, to pursue a love marriage, which in India typically means I'm not going to wait for my parents, or
Correct.
I'm not going to leave it to my parents to choose my partner. I'm going to do that on my own on the basis of my personal feelings for that person.
Right.
And there I illustrated, Mars is typically a powerful force because Mars is the planet of desire, of courage as well, to defy tradition, and it's also a planet of adventure, to jump the fence and step outside the norm of behavior. So that was one thing for love marriage. And then, of course, for foreign marriage, yes, Mars influence needs to prevail as well too. But then you bring in Saturn and or Rahu, because they are typically the karakas for foreigners, for those who are, whether different caste, different nationality, religion, ethnicity, even, the whole topic of same-sex relationships, is covered under that particular category.
Excellent. So, and you also get into this sexually nuanced yogas, and followed by Purushartha, which is very interesting. But shall we talk about some yogas, or you want to just leave it with the book and let
No,
the reader?
I can touch upon that briefly. Some of the yogas, and again, I did a lot of reading and thinking about all this. And, I cited the example of, one yoga that's so common, Chandra Mangala yoga, right?
Yeah.
Moon Mars, I mean, it's generically considered to be one of the basic wealth yogas, on the premise that the person will have a certain degree of action-oriented zeal, adventurism, will to, pursue their objectives. But translate that into a relationship context, it can indicate a person whose passions may run hot. And so Dr. Raman, in his book, 300 Important Combinations, talks about Chandra Mangala yoga as being one of those that can provoke, sexual behaviors in individuals who will, pursue relationships. Not only those to which they're properly attracted, a wife, but beyond the wife as well too. So it implies, some degree of adultery. And Viparita yoga too. You can take this straight from Shastra, the three examples, whether 6th, 8th, or 12th houses and involvement. And it literally says, and I guess that depends upon the translation, but the one that I have that is quite popular, Shastri, I think, is the author or commentator, translator, and talks about, quote unquote, the individual with this Viparita yoga will traverse other men's wives, meaning, commit adultery. So I'm not inventing this. And then, of course, Parivartana yogas, when you have any involvement with 7th Lord and the 6th, 8th, or 12th Lord. I mean, mean, that's a sort of a natural to say that there's some degree of irregularity about relationships, which is either, cheating on the spouse or consorting with prostitutes or becoming, a sexual addict, for instance, respectively for houses 6, 8, and 12 in exchange with the seventh. So, I mean, this stuff has been there in Shastra for forever, but it's not until you pay attention to it and look for the material, as I was, within the context of relationships, in order for people to understand. And again, this is not gratuitous. It's simply just a consequence of my thorough research to try to see what is out there that has a bearing upon this aspect of human life.
All right. So, on the other hand, I think I want to kind of bring this entire thing to an end with Purushartha, because that is, I felt that it's one of the most important things that not only forms the foundation of Jyotish itself, but it's also important for relationships. So did you want to kind of touch upon something else before we move back, or did you want to talk about some planets in specific to relationships as it is?
I can just briefly allude to one of the, with respect to sexuality in the horoscope, you can divide the planets, the grahas properly, into two different camps. What I, colloquially referred to as the good girls, which are Moon and Venus, which are romantically inclined and sort of, soft-edged passion, desire. And then there are the sort of the other grahas, which are more, hard-edged, passionate. And those are Mars, Saturn, and their proxies, the Chayagraha, Rahu and Ketu. And so when you get combinations with good girls on one side and bad boys on the other side. So if you have combinations of Moon with Mars or Saturn or one of the nodes, or Venus with Mars or Saturn or one of the nodes, then you have these sort of signatures for passion. And then if they also occupy houses 1 and 7, and the fourth house comes into this as well too, because it's one of the sort of houses for cathartic release, which is, part of the basic end point, if you like, the destination in all sexual relationships. And so those grahas are pivotal in the analysis of sexuality. You might say, well, what about Sun and Mercury and Venus? Well, they're and Jupiter, Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter. They're not part of this protocol because they are not really considered passionate. And so we can work with these others in order to define a kind of a passion quotient for any individual native of a horoscope. I can talk to Purusharthas as well briefly if you'd like me to.
Sorry?
I can speak about Purusharthas as well too.
Yeah, that's what I think. That is the best thing, because I think the conversation is anyway leading there.
Yep. Okay. So Purusharthas, if everyone doesn't know what this means, it's basically, the noble aims of life. And we all start off with the same sort of desires and needs. And, there's a kind of a parallel here with the American psychologist Abraham Maslow, who developed a hierarchy of needs, which, seemingly sort of explains the behavior of all people. And so we start out with wanting a simple security of, a roof over our heads and food in our bellies. And, for some that can be simply a lean-to with a tarpaulin and rice and beans. But it evolves, of course, with societies, and then people want proper houses and people want, good food. And at the end of it, they want, carpets underfoot and music around them and dessert as well. So your needs for artha can, escalate, of course, but basic security leads from the most minimalist of basic security on to very refined forms of security, mundane material security. Right. After that comes kama. We want to enjoy pleasure of some kind in our lives. And, that means certain creature comforts, rather than crude clothing, we want silk shirts. And rather than, tapping away on a little tambura of our own, we want a nice hi-fi system that, plays, the most sublime of music. And we want entertainment, and we want this, that, and the other, and pleasure of all kinds. So that's the spectrum of kama. After that comes
Moksha.
Dharma, which,
Yeah.
when we've fulfilled our own personal ambitions and everything's going great for me and my family, I mean, the right-minded person will say, well, then I want to do good for my extended family, however I define that, my literal cousins and uncles and aunts, or my community, my town, my city, my state, my country. There's no end to it, depending on the largesse and the capacity of the individual to extend their wealth to others. So that's a form of doing the right thing, right? Extend your bounty to others. And then finally, at the end of it all, you can't take it with you, as they say. And that ushers us into, the stage of moksha, where you begin to say, well, I'm not taking this with me. What can I leave behind? How can I lighten my spiritual load so that I can, ascend to another level? And you start giving stuff away and dispensing with things that you no longer need. It's like being on a ship, and when the ship is sinking, you very quickly divide everything on that ship into two things: flotsam and jetsam. Flotsam is that which floats. And so if the hold of the ship is filled with styrofoam, don't worry about it. But if on the ship you have, tons of iron, well, that goes overboard right away because it's going to carry you down. So we simplify our lives as we get older and older and release all those things. And so release, liberation are key words for moksha as well, too. So in the book, I delved into the themes of two specific themes in Purushartha, which are kama, the pursuit of pleasure, and moksha, the desire for release. And I don't need to explain, that in the context of relationships and sexuality, those two go hand in glove. And that's why Purushartha analysis in the horoscope is very germane and relevant to any exploration of relationships. And I give multiple examples of how some people are very much driven by their desire for pleasure, and it can lead them into happiness, but it can lead them into addiction, and then sometimes into legal problems, and so on and so forth. And I give some examples of that in my book.
That's awesome. And almost an entire part of your book, maybe you can just split your book into two halves. One is the foundation and the other is examples. So I think you spend more than 170 to 180 pages just for the example charts, which is a wealth of knowledge that is kind of stuffed into this one book. So I think that kind of pretty much brings us towards circling end to our conversation, talking about our book. And as much as I say, I can kind of keep going on because there is a lot of things to be spoken about. But where can people find the book? And do we have both paperback and ebook version?
Yeah, as with all of my books, you can find everything on Amazon. So whether you want the ebook digital form or whether you want a printed paperback for your library, everything is on Amazon. Easy one-stop shopping.
Sure. I think people can also find you on Instagram and Facebook, and you keep posting the offers on your books on Facebook once in a while when you see some offers are there. So I think it's worth following your work on social media and also your website. I think it's navamsa.com.
Yes, that's right.
So I'll also link all those in the description page of this video. And I surely recommend people to kind of go back and check this book. I have read all Alan's book. It's like I have Kindle versions, and this is my second paperback version of your book. Others are, I think, one of the books I have in Kindle. So I'm sure this is one of the most important works of modern times, and I surely recommend people to check this out. So do you have any other thing that you're doing at this point, that you want people to kind of take note of, Alan?
Currently, I'm working on a book on career. And so, I have no idea of knowing. I'd like to think I'd be finished with it by the end of this year. But again, I have gone down the rabbit hole of research for this. And of course, that's, it's a very deep topic as well, too. And Well, equally, I guess, with relationships, I get into pretty deep waters there. And so it seems to be going with this career book as well, too. And again, I'm learning a lot, and in due course, perhaps not this year, but early next year, I hope to be able to release it in the same two formats and be up on Amazon and available for others. And again, why am I doing this? Because, as I've said to my many students, get a handle on relationships and career, because 90% of the time, that is why your clients are coming to see you. Again and again and again. These are perennial, universal subjects of concern for humanity.
Just like we have Purusharthas, which form the kind of four pillars of Jyotish, the four pillars of the reason why people want astrology is finance, family, health, and career. So
yeah, it's true.
And you can always link family and relationships in many ways. So yeah, so I think it was amazing talking with you about your book, Alan, and I'm sure people will, most people would have already read it, but if someone has not, I think it's important to kind of take note of this work. And I wish you very well for your future projects, and I personally look forward to your book on career.
Lovely. Great. Well, thanks for having me, Ashwin. Good to see you again.
Thank you.